Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are doing a tier list of best of one standard and where I think they should go. Why are we doing this today and what is the purpose? One, to kind of just show what we think is the best of the best, or maybe like some type of card that you should be playing if you want to be playing that top of the line deck, or at least just how it feels based on how I'm playing, or does like skill matter, because obviously certain decks will be a lot easier to learn than others. But why are we doing this? I had to pick up my friend at the airport. We took the wrong turn. Kind of, sort of, like we were going to someone else's address instead of the address where our cars were. Long story short, it took us the back way for about an hour plus, and someone that may be in this conversation with me and you that gets motion sickness very, very badly. It's me. It's me. I get motion sickness very bad. And it took about an hour for us to get about 15 miles because I just could not ride in a car without throwing up everywhere. To put it bluntly and just get it out there. So, I don't have that long to record because I don't know how well I'll be feeling in about 40 minutes. So, to do magic content, maybe not playing that well, being a little bit out of it, I'm just going to talk about these decks and kind of where I think they placed. First off, we are going to talk about the World Championship, the Is It Looting deck or the Is It Monument deck, and where we think it's going to go. I'm just going to throw things up here kind of at first if there's nothing in the tier so we can kind of isolate it and show what we're talking about. And this deck is a very weird place because obviously in best of one it's very, very strong, and I tend to think it's very, very strong, or in best of three I tend to think it's strong in best of one as well, based on what I played and based on kind of how some other people are playing. Looting has been a archetype / is it prowess for a very long time, so it hurts me to put it in S tier. Like, I kind of just want to do an honorary D tier so we can all feel good about Is It not being the best deck in standard for a while, because we just need it to be any other deck. But unfortunately, I do think in the hands of the right player, it is definitely S. In the hands of a player who is just picking it up for the first time, I still think it's an A. I think a lot of players will make mistakes on how to use the monument, and this is a very timing-based deck. But I think because it won the World Championship, we just have to honor it by putting it into the S tier, and that is just where the Is It deck will reside. Other than that, let's move on to something a bit more interesting and that I want to talk about. I'm kind of picking these at random, but let's talk about the deck's counter being blue-white control. And you might be like, how does that counter? What does it do? Why are we kind of talking about blue-white control when it comes to countering the Is It deck? Well, one, blue-white control does have counter spells and hard counter spells at that. So It'll Quench You is going to be a little bit harder to get through whenever you're talking about, not It'll Quench You, but like It'll Quench You is not going to match up as well as these other counter spells are. And especially when they go to jam the monument or the card that loots, I can't think it's Artist Talent. When I try to jam that and it gets countered, it's not going to feel great. And Rest in Peace for blue-white control is a very good card just overall in the meta. However, do I think it's S tier? No, because obviously the systemic aggro decks can get under you, and being on the draw and having to beg Arena to give you a board wipe just so you can not lose the game to all the aggro decks is a bit tough. The Aura's deck is a bit of a problem, but weirdly enough, against the best meta decks, I think blue-white control is actually really strong, and it is good to reside in A. But what about its counterpart? The deck I enjoy more is not that one. Where's Chico at? Chico, the beautiful dragon it is. I love this card, and I prefer to play Jeskai Control because I get access to Lightning Helix. I get that kind of Snapcaster feeling. I talk about it pretty often. But do I think as good as blue-white is right now? And I think that answer is no, because you can't really play Rest in Peace because you have Chico in your deck, and that's kind of not a thing you want to be doing. The Jeskai card, the 7-mana card that is kind of your win condition, can oftentimes be a bit slow, but also required to win your games. So I never feel confident whenever I have a copy or two in my hand, especially drawing one pretty early on. Makes it feel like a dead card, and maybe we'll never even get there. And that kind of resides in the same thing as blue-white control. Just too many issues, just kind of having our save Same scenario. We do have a little bit better of a removal package with Lightning Helix bridging the gap against a lot of aggro. But Jeskai preyed on kind of mono red. Now I'm looking at it. I actually don't even have mono red on this category. So maybe I'll get to add that picture in here in a minute. But I think Jeskai control resides in B tier. I think against blue-white control, it is just the inferior deck of the two. So I think it can't reside on the same tier, even though I want it to. So we're going to put it into B tier right now. Other than that, let's go to one of the other top decks, and that's going to be the Teamer Flood Color deck, the combo version of the kind of looting deck. If you would, you flash in the Flood Color, you'd cast a couple spells, untap everything, and it's good there. However, I think this is one of the decks that struggles from gameplay problems more than anything. And that always comes into play when it's a combo type deck. Like, when do you play the Flood Color? Did you play it too early? There's only 2 copies in most of the top end lists. It also plays Badger Mole Cub, so you can maybe accidentally get your game playing confused where you're not using Badger Mole Cub as a combo piece, but you're trying to use it as a value piece. And it's just like a really weird, awkward deck. Although very strong in best of 3 and very strong in the best players' hands, this is one of those decks that I think is going to be hard to kind of put anywhere. Because if you do it based off of the World Championship, you're like, well, clearly it's an S tier deck. But those are the best players in the world playing it. At least you would assume. It's Worlds. You would assume the best players in the world are playing the deck and getting to that top 8. They're not obviously getting lucky with variance all the way there. They have to win some games against a lot of good players. So they are making the percentages theirs and winning that way. So I wouldn't say, like, if that was the case, it would obviously be an S tier deck. However, I think the picking it up for the first time and how it kind of can be a bit tough to grab a hold on to with all the rares and stuff. Some people might have inferior versions of the deck. I know that's kind of a weird thing to bring into a tier list. So I'm going to put it in A, and I'm going to set it behind blue-white control, I believe. I know that sounds a bit wild because it is such a good explosive deck. I just think in best of 1, where you need so many pieces to perform the combo in a format that your hand's super curved, especially for the aggro players, I think the Valley Flood Color deck can kind of find some issues with that. For example, you could just go against Auras, which is a deck you'll most likely never see in best of 3. And then you're just like, well, how do I beat the flying, first striking, Shelter by Ghost card? Like, how do I beat that? And oftentimes you just can't. So having kind of things like that is a bit tough. So I'm going to put it in kind of the bottom of A for now. Other than that, we can move on to some of the other things, and we can maybe spread out our tier list a bit. And then we're going to talk about Mono Green Tifa. This is a deck that at the very beginning of Avatar being released, I was pretty high on. I was saying like maybe A, maybe top of B, and fighting to be an A or whatever. This deck with Badger Mole Cub is very nice. It gives you that good backup plan. And with the other Earth bending cards, it feels like the deck should be a lot higher. However, other archetypes have thrived off of Badger Mole Cub. And I think this being the worst deck in its own archetype is not that great. So this is going to be a bit harsh. But for now, I'm going to set it in C. But do not be surprised if we drop it to D. I almost feel like D is the right place. It's just a deck that it will beat you. And it will interact with you. But as best of 1 has it, a lot of interactions being used and a lot of exile effects, and especially with the Izzet deck being able to play a lot of removal as well, I just think this deck's going to have a hard time finding a home. Now again, all these decks you can hit Mythic with if you are a very good player with it. I do want to get that out of the way right now, and I feel like this is a good time, because I can imagine somebody might be like, how can you say Tifa's D? I think all these decks can hit Mythic, and I think they're all good. I just think when you're talking about how they curve out in every single game, Tifa will get to Mythic by winning like 53% for the average player who can hit Mythic. However, like Blue-Eye Control, you might be winning 60% of the time, right? So it's a bit of a weird thing, and I do think like player talent matters a lot, and I do think Tifa has its ceiling is very high, but its floor is incredibly low. Like, you could play 2 creatures, they all get removed, and you never found a protection spell, or you can have all the protection and no creatures, or the time you play a creature, it gets removed, and then now all your protection's dead. It just feels hard to play in general. So I'm going to put it in D, although maybe a bit harsh. D oftentimes is that deck that spot where I don't have enough knowledge about it myself, but it's obviously going to find a way on the tier list. Other than that, where do we want to go? Another D tier list? Maybe this is my personal bias, but I hate this deck with a passion. And I think that is just the mere mill. I think this deck is one of the decks that thrives off best of one, and even then it oftentimes feels weird to play, because if you actually have your mill cards, the Simic aggro decks and the reanimator decks can all just get under you too fast that you can't do anything about it. Whenever your main game plan is fuel my opponent's graveyard, and Is It Lessons is running around that wants their graveyard fueled, or the reanimator deck that wants cards in their graveyard, or the Sephiroth deck that wants cards in their graveyard, it's just, there's too many matchups that counter you. So you have to hope for your good matchups, which is obviously going to be like control and stuff most of the time, or decks that can't just finish the job very quickly, or decks, for example, like Landfall sometimes can be that, where it feels like as long as you remove the early, you can then get to that board wipe and save yourself. But if you run into a lot of aggro, you're going to find a lot of problems. So I don't know exactly where I want to put this. So I'm going to put it in the front of D for now. Again, things will move around as I kind of move more of these decks in there. I don't know exactly what we're going to do. I think I'm just going to make Boros aggro and mono red aggro kind of the same archetype. And my dog is squeaking her toy. Unfortunately, she is all the way across the room and I cannot bring her on cam. Isn't that right, Sadie? Oh, she's coming over here. But what do we want to go to next? I have to also remember these as I'm looking at them. One, let's talk about the Bant deck, because this is going to be the interesting thing. The Bant Ang list is a little bit different than the Tempo list, and I do think this deck is hard to play. However, the one I'm referring to is the one that's playing Appa, and it does, I think, have the combo in it. There is kind of the other list. This is one of the problems with the tier list, is there's like way too many decks. It's hard to put them all one here and talk about them all. If there's ones that you specifically want, this is me telling you now to recommend them in the comments so I can actually add them to the tier list, and then I can do this maybe like 2 weeks later. But the Bant kind of combo Ang tempo deck with all the exile type stuff, I want to give this C tier, even though it did perform well at Worlds in the best of 3 where the format's a bit slower. But I think the problem here with it is you can't really do the combo that well online, where you have to kind of cycle through it. If your opponent makes you do it, and best of one's kind of timer can actually rope you out if you don't necessarily have the dexterity to do it quickly, and then maybe you're doing it quickly and you mess up. I do think that is a big kind of negative towards the deck. And again, all decks can't be treated equally. I do think this is strong enough to be in B, and I do think it could technically be an A, given the right meta and the fact that we might not rely on the Appa combo. But one of the things is we can try to, again, approach it. Things can swing pretty big. Like, this could be all the way in S tier, maybe in the future. But let's move on to Dimir. This is a mid-range deck, and mid-range decks typically struggle in the meta oftentimes, trying to fit the gap, if you would, where you can have enough stuff to answer the aggro stuff early, but be fast enough to get under the long range kind of control decks and other decks that want to outvalue you. For example, it can be a bit weird because you can obviously get there kind of quick, but then once they start putting the top 3 cards in their deck into their hand, it oftentimes is pretty hard to get through. Or your small things are just getting picked off by their burn spells. So Kaido's cheaper, Enduring Curiosity gets exiled with the removal that they're playing. So it feels weird, and I think Dimir fits right into B. Can oftentimes go all the way to S and back to B. I do think B is its floor. I don't think Dimir is going to ever be any worse than this. I do think when Lorwyn comes out, you're going to see Dimir fly kind of up the charts as we get some flash creatures out of there. And then maybe even instead of kind of the Dimir list we know, it's going to be Dimir fairies for the most part, because we still have the good fairy cards And with Lorwyn, there's going to be a lot new fairy cards, so it just kind of seems like easy to slot in. You could probably put it in front of Jeskai. I do think it has a little bit better than Jeskai capabilities, and I do think we are on its floor. I don't think I would ever put Dimir right now, obviously the current variation of Dimir, any lower than B, but I don't know if right now I can argue that it's an A tier deck, just because every time I play it, it feels like I kind of need good matchups, and when you feel like you need good matchups, you're maybe not playing the best deck. So another deck that we can kind of get into here is Orzhov Sephiroth, and I'm just going to be up front talking about a deck that just, one, is not the best in its category, and that's Reanimator. Two, is not the best aggro deck. Three, requires kind of a lot of cards, so it's definitely going to slot into that C tier. Honestly, I might swap. Man, Mill might be better, and that's kind of crazy for me to say. Mill's kind of down here because it's just in my doghouse right now. Every time I see it, it just makes me mad. So this could be a bit of a bias sticking through. But Orzhov Sephiroth, I think, has to be C, and I think its peak is like B. Right now, you could argue sometimes it gets into A, but I think C is a pretty good slot for it. I just don't know when you need that much stuff to go your way. And the other thing, it is going to get hit incredibly hard with the meta shift of how good the Izzet deck is with the spells and the lessons. For example, blue-white, again, another crushed deck by blue-white being good is going to be the fact that we resolve Rest in Peace, and it's good luck. All these are die triggers. You do not get those with the Rest in Peace in play, and then you just find yourself doing about nothing. So it's a bit weird. So with that said, we can move on to Burn. And Burn / Mono Red. And let's be honest, Red is that weird deck that can kind of just always be good. I think it also resides in the fact that it'll never be lower than B tier, and oftentimes will find itself in A tier. There for a while with Screaming Nemesis and stuff, it was definitely S, but the kind of meta has changed, and I do think right now it feels like it's in the front of B tier. Whenever I can look at my hand and keep knowing that more times than not that I'm not going to be against aggro, like at least mono red aggro, I feel like that's a pretty bad sign, and that would put it probably at the front of B tier for me. Because again, it is very good. It oftentimes can do anything. The teamer deck being an A is actually kind of tweaking me right now, because I don't feel in my soul that it's better than these. But this is a world championship placement. I think it'll come back down as, you know, kind of the best of one meta curves. And this is kind of an honorary placement because of where it plays in worlds. So again, be a little easy on these two placements for now, at least when it comes to best of one. But Boros and Mono Red kind of being in the same slot, because let's be honest, Boros is two other cards that just put Burn to the face, so it's really just Mono Red, and it's kind of the better version of Mono Red right now, so it's getting that treatment. So I'm going to put it in the front of B. I don't think I can put it any lower, because again, if you're on the play and your opponent really just doesn't play a removal spell at all, then you're going to find yourself doing very well. And what are we going to do with Reanimator? Reanimator is one of those decks that is popping off in all facets. It's really, really good. It is either at the top of the board, it did get a list in top 8 at Worlds, so obviously you have that nod. It's just won a challenge. It's been 5-0ing leagues. It is a very good a best of one deck. It always feels like they're one turn away. They're just one turn and they'll win the game, right? So when you kind of have that fear about your deck, I think you at minimum have to be B, and I'm going to put it in the front of B. And that all the things I said could be an automatic A, right? Like you should think it's an automatic A, and maybe I will put it here for now, and we might slot it back into B. I think right here is fine, because this is really no different than this location, because this is the very front of B, but let's put it at the end of A. I think the problem with Reanimator and the main issue with Reanimator, actually I am going to put it B, because I looked down and I saw some lists. There's a couple of other lists going to be in A. So this list, the main problem is what's going to be the main problem for the Sephiroth deck, except oftentimes it just does it a little bit faster, that if your opponent doesn't have it right away, they're in trouble. where Rest in Peace can always catch this one, is again the Rest in Peace kind of graveyard hate that is now going to be slotted into a lot of these decks, because they're going to have to be able to be the Lessons deck and taking away all their value that they have from that graveyard. No Storm Chasers talents, no like extra damage from their Lessons, no extra kind of cards that they're getting. They're just playing strategic planning, or there's one that does basically the same thing. I don't remember. So again, could be A, but I'm going to put it in B for now, just because again, best of one meta just becomes kind of this weird place where if people are like graveyard decks aren't allowed to exist anymore, you're not going to be able to do anything at all. And then we can lead right into the Simic aggro deck, and I'm going to put it in A. This is one of those decks that it's just better than aggro, like Boros aggro right now, so it has to be A. You could argue that it's in Simic, but I just can't feel that it's the same as the Izzet deck, but it's 100% at the front of A. This is one of the decks against control. You kind of feel like you can't get there in time, and then they just Ouroboros you on turn 3, and you're like, okay, so how do I answer that? And if you do, they're still hitting you for like 7 on that turn. And then if they have another one, or like an Innkeeper's talent, and things are getting larger, or they play the Rabbit that if you target any of their stuff, it just maybe, obviously the control decks can maybe handle it, but the aggro deck is like target, everything else is getting bigger. Dimir has a weird time against it. Graveyard has to have time to deal with it. Sephiroth, they got trample. The 1/1s don't really matter that much. Bant, it gets underneath. Mill oftentimes can answer, but it doesn't really set them back too much, and they can just outvalue Mill if Mill's not ready for it. And again, they go too wide for the green deck. So I do like them at the front of A. This could be the only other S tier comp right now, but based on statistics and based on Untapped, I want to double check before I claim this. Based on Untapped and on the ladder, it is the highest win rate deck just in best of 1, so it must be good enough. So I just went to decks, and it says, yep, it says mono white aggro / auras. Technically, it's a bit weird because its win rate is, it's a 470 games, so oftentimes it's a bit harder to be like, oh, it's the best deck, because 400 games is still kind of a small amount of games when you're talking about the grand scheme of players who could be playing that exact deck. But of 470 games, it's a 63.5% win rate. This deck has now taken over the mono red angle, where when you see this deck and they're on the play and they put that 1-drop in play and hold up that protection spell, you just know you have to have 2, or you have to get them kind of being lazy with their spells and maybe messing some stuff up. So it is the only other S tier comp, I think, right now. And we kind of have some fuzzballs at the bottom where we don't really know where to put them. Life gain, I'm going to put at the front of C. Maybe 1. Life gain can oftentimes beat Sephiroth. I think the Bant deck's probably better. But Life gain is just that weird deck that it's like the best deck for a week, and statistically oftentimes has a good win rate. Whereas, okay, I know one of the decks I don't have in here that I am going to bring in. So yeah, just like that. It's that easy. See, tier lists oftentimes are easy. That's why if you ever have a list, I can maybe help find, like I can find it, put it in. That's why I was saying mono red, but I had to go grab it. I didn't have artifacts, so that's a bit weird. But mono white life gain, I think, is at C. You could argue it's a D. Mono white life gain deck, the problem with it is its range is D to like bottom of A tier. Because when aggro is good, like if mono red was the best deck, life gain would be incredible because they don't have Screaming Nemesis anymore. But mono red not even being good lacks kind of the reason for you to play it. And then the Monument deck, a arguably good matchup. The problem is they just get so many cards and they remove everything that you just don't have anything to put pressure on yourself, so you find yourself behind the whole time. So with that, we have the mono green ramp deck. This, in terms of fun, is S. In terms of like variants can just get really weird. It feels like D. I'm going to put it in C. Just because it's a really fun ramp deck, and I want to be a little bit more pressure about, like, I only want so many decks kind of up here and down, but it is better than these two, maybe not better than the Bant deck, but this is one of those decks where if it's hitting right, you're just doing the most absurd things. For example, I cast Crater Hoof on the same turn twice with the Leyline Weavers. They were making 3 mana turn. I tapped 3 of them, cast Crater Hoof. They bounced it back to my hand. The Weaver's untapped, and I just cast it again, which was incredible. They didn't let it resolve, and I did not get to hit them with it, but it was a good time. Other than that, we have the Jeskai Artifacts. You want to talk about a deck that goes from C tier to A tier to S tier when it comes to best of one? It is definitely Synthesizer. I do not know where it resides right now. This is arguably the hardest one for me to kind of evaluate and where I want to put it. But, man, it's just so weird. I don't know how to... This is honestly the hardest one. Because logic would tell me, well, based on win rates and how often it's been good, just throw an A. But I haven't really seen Artifacts all too much because it just struggles against the Badger Mold Cup decks. And then if Control is going to be good, it's going to be fine because it doesn't really care about its graveyard that much. But can it beat the Izzet deck or the Aura deck because the Aura deck is way too fast? And then they try to exile it and then they use their protection. So if we go down the line, I don't think it's favored in this matchup. I don't think it's favored here. I don't think it's favored here. If they're playing Ultima, they're not favored. If they're not playing Ultima, is favored. So there's a win-ish kind of for it. This Valley Floodcaller deck, again, I think is one of the decks that's going to slowly shoot down the list. But again, for honorary reasons of the Worlds, we're going to leave it in A. So I'm going to kind of wash that off. I think in terms of 4-mana cards that are powerful, I think the Graveyard deck's a bit better. I think aggro is in such a weird spot, at least mono red, that I don't think that it can go in front, like behind it. So I'm going to put it in B tier right there. It has the win rate to back up its kind of play to be higher, but I just struggle to put it any higher right now when personally the amount that I'm seeing it in comparison to how much I was seeing it prior to now is way lower. So with that said, this is the tier list. We'll go through it one more time. Obviously some people skip to the end, so here is your marker. Hello, like little clap there for you, you know. But is it looting / is it monument, whatever you want to call it? It's S tier. It won Worlds. It did very well in best of one. It's everywhere in best of one right now. So it's got the honorary front of the head S tier kind of tier. And then we have the best winning deck list in terms of best of one according to stats. And honestly, it's a very easy deck to play. I don't think the skill gap on this one is a determining factor at all. So we have the Aura deck or the mono white aggro / Aura deck here. Then we go into Simic aggro. This is kind of just Badger Mold Cub decks in general, but we're going to call it Simic for now. Playing the Draenith or the Green Lantern, I think. Not Green Lantern, jeez. The Green Goblin or whatever it is in paper. So that's the kind of honorary spot for it. Blue-White Control, because I do think it's a lot better in the meta currently. Valley Flood Color combo here just because it is kind of hard to play, but this is also an honorary spot because of Worlds and being in that top 8 twice. And then another deck that did squeeze into top 8 in the 8th position. This is the Reanimator deck using Superior Spider-Man or Karavek the Mind Bitten or Caravo the Mind Bitten in terms of arena play. Artifacts, because it oftentimes can be the best deck. The kind of high-end aggro being best puts this in a really weird spot. So have it a bit lower. Boros, because whenever you can keep a hand that doesn't scream, wow, I can't keep this because it's probably mono red, and that's not a conversation we're having right now, we're going to put that in B tier. The Mirror, because it's just the format's too wide, your removal has to be too flexible, and it's just not enough there. Where you losing like Cut Down, for example, is a good card that we'd be playing 4 of right now that we just don't have that replacement. And playing at sorcery speed just feels criminally bad. Jeskai at the back because one, it's not the best in its kind of archetype, where Blue-White Control I would argue is better now. So that it gets that nod there. It can't be in the same tier that it's worse than. So obviously it's here and kind of at the back end. The Bant deck, because I think on Arena is just typically hard to play in best of one. It is a very awkward deck. It does have a learning curve to it. you can't really do the Appa combo. Like, you can, but you have to, like, do the combo, at least from when I was doing it the first time. There might have been an update and change, but I was getting hit with a timer pretty quickly in that, and doing like 7 actions to make a 1/1. Not that great. Mono green ramp, it's a cute deck, it's a fun deck, but I do think it's better than kind of everything below it, so it resides here after the Bant deck. This Bant deck, you could argue, could go up, but I don't want to overflood B tier, because then that's just kind of a bit weird, and it just seems like there's just too many there. Mono white, because mono white can be the best deck on any weekend or the worst deck on any weekend, and right now I think it's more on the worst side because mono red's not that good and the other decks just outvalue it too hard. Orzhov, because again, with a deck that requires their graveyard to be good and the graveyard hate coming in full force, Orzhov sacrifice is just a little too slow and it's worse than Reanimator. Dimir Mill, because I hate it in D, but realistically the Mill deck is, it just, like, every time I lose the Mill, it feels like, wow, you had every card along the way to get you there, and that's not a great feeling, at least to me, in terms of decks winning. And then the entire other half is like, yeah, you lost with 7 cards in your hand because none of them did anything against the deck I was playing. So it's a bit weird. Mill could be higher, but again, something has to be in D tier, and it resides there. A little bit of my pettiness is in that decision. I get it. But, you know, if you play Dimir Mill, I still love you. Seek some help. With that said, we're on the mono green at the end, and I just think the hard part of this mono green landfall is, man, looking at this list, I do feel like it's here now. Honestly, I kind of feel better about this. I actually feel way better about this now that I think about it, but we're already this far in, and this is why we will have to do this, like, kind of ongoing. That's why, like, in football, you do tier lists over and over again every week, because it's just so drastically changing all the time. But right now, I just don't see the list. I never see it. I always see the Simic aggro deck over it. I've seen this deck way more often than I've seen this deck. Every time I've seen it, I've just been using good removal, and I remove the thing as soon as they play it, and then they just fold and never are able to do anything. Outside the few times that they play the 3-drop, and I don't have a removal in my top 4 draws, maybe even sometimes 7, 8, 9, 10 cards, along with the 7 I drew, so we're looking like 15, 17 cards, and I just don't have a removal spell for a 1/1 somehow, and I just lose the game that way. If it's not that, most of the time I'm beating the mono green deck, at least it feels, and the kind of secret tech that it has is not really there. If they're holding up a mana, it's Snakeskin Veil. If they're holding up no mana, they have nothing, remove the creature. Like, it is just, is what it is. It kind of sucks, but right now, this is the tier list. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. If you have any decks that you want me to put in, please recommend them. Again, I was doing this very quickly after just getting back. It took 2 hours extra to get here and get home, so obviously it was a bit more rushed than I would like it to be, and I would like to list a lot of deck lists with them as well. I just unfortunately will not be able to do that right now, but I wanted to get a video out, and I felt like this was maybe the right time to do it after Worlds. So, with that said, I hope you all enjoy it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.